They said it at the dinner table like it was a fact, not an insult. My sister was the future pilot. The investment. The pride. I was the extra expense they could no longer justify. A waste of money and time. The words landed clean and final, like a verdict already signed. I watched my parents slide brochures across the table toward her. Aviation school. Flight hours. Simulators. Dreams with price tags they were happy to pay. When I asked a simple question about my plans, my father did not look up. My mother sighed, already tired of me. The message was clear. One child was taking off. The other was baggage. That night, I packed my things quietly. Not to run. To disappear long enough to rebuild. I worked 2 jobs. Nights at a warehouse, mornings in a repair shop. I learned fast because I had to. I saved every dollar because no one else would. I stopped asking for approval and started collecting skills. Certifications first. Licenses next. Doors opened when effort replaced permission. Years passed. My sister sent photos in uniform. Cockpit selfies. Proud captions. My parents shared them everywhere. They never asked what I was doing. They assumed they already knew. I kept my progress private. Not out of shame. Out of strategy. I studied systems, safety, logistics, and operations. I learned how decisions get made behind the scenes. I learned where power really sits in aviation. It is not always in the left seat. One winter, a message arrived in the family group chat. A surprise trip. First class. A celebration flight. My sister would be on duty that day. My parents were thrilled. They said destiny had a sense of humor. I read the details twice and felt something settle into place. The airline. The route. The timing. I closed the app and smiled for the first time in a long while. They thought the story ended years ago at that table. They were wrong. The weeks before the flight passed quietly, but my mind stayed alert. Every detail mattered now. I reviewed schedules, routes, and staffing patterns the way I once studied survival. Patterns always reveal more than promises. I knew which crews rotated through that route and who signed off on final decisions. I also knew my name was no longer invisible in the system, even if it was invisible to my family. I booked my seat without telling anyone. Not because I wanted a reveal, but because silence had always worked in my favor. I chose a time that made sense. A reason that required no explanation. People who underestimate you rarely question your absence. The night before the flight, my parents posted again. A photo of my sister's uniform laid out neatly. Pride poured from every caption. I felt nothing but clarity. Pride built on comparison is fragile. It shatters the moment the scale changes. At the airport, I moved through security like someone who belonged there. Years ago, I had learned that confidence is not loud. It is procedural. It follows rules so well that no one stops you. I watched families hurry past, pilots stride with purpose, and executives move like time waited for them. I had learned to move the same way. Boarding began early. First class filled quickly. My parents settled in, already telling nearby passengers that their daughter was flying today. I stayed out of sight, watching from a distance, noting how easily pride turns into performance. The gate agent announced a slight delay. Routine. Harmless. I saw my parents' smiles tighten. Delays irritate people who believe schedules bend for them. My sister passed through the gate, confident and radiant. Applause followed her like a reward. I checked my phone. One final confirmation. Everything aligned. As passengers boarded, I took my place. Calm. Invisible. Necessary. I passed my parents without recognition. Years had trained them to look through me. Inside the aircraft, the hum of preparation filled the cabin. Crew members moved with practiced efficiency. I felt the weight of what was coming, not as excitement, but as inevitability. This was not about proving them wrong. It was about letting them see the truth they never bothered to ask for. And once the doors closed, there would be no turning back. The cabin settled into that uneasy calm that comes before movement. Seatbelt clicked. Overhead bins closed. The low murmur of anticipation filled the air. My parents leaned toward each other, whispering proudly, soaking in attention from strangers who nodded along. They loved this moment. Public pride felt like validation. I remained quiet, focused on the rhythm of the aircraft. The systems humming beneath the floor. The checklist cadence echoing faintly from the front. I knew those sounds well. I had memorized them long before this day, back when no one believed I was worth the effort. The captain's voice came through the speakers, steady and professional. Welcome aboard. Destination confirmed. Estimated flight time announced. Applause followed, louder this time. My parents clapped hardest, unaware of how close they were to a truth they had never prepared for. I glanced toward the cockpit door as it opened briefly. My sister stepped out, greeting passengers in first class. She looked confident, composed, exactly how my parents had always imagined success. She had earned her place. I never doubted that. What they never questioned was mine. The door closed again, sealing more than just a cabin. I felt the shift. The moment where plans transition into consequences. I checked my watch. Timing was perfect. A flight attendant approached my row, pausing longer than usual. She nodded at me, subtle, professional. No words exchanged. Confirmation delivered. My parents noticed nothing. The aircraft began its slow pushback. The sensation pulled memories forward. Being told not to dream too big. Being reminded of costs. Being compared until comparison felt like identity. All of it led here. As we taxied, a new announcement interrupted the routine. A brief update. A procedural adjustment. Passengers listened casually, assuming it meant nothing. I watched my parents' expressions shift from pride to mild confusion. The engines paused. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. And then the captain's voice returned, this time with a tone that demanded attention. Not urgency. Authority. The kind that precedes a reveal. I sat back, hands steady, knowing the next words would finally force my family to see what they had chosen to ignore. Because this flight was about to take a turn none of them expected. The captain explained a staffing update, calm and precise, the kind that sounds routine until it is not. A qualified crew member would be joining the flight to support operations due to a last-minute adjustment. Passengers nodded, already losing interest. My parents did not. Their smiles thinned. Pride hates uncertainty. The cockpit door opened again. A senior crew member stepped into the aisle and scanned the cabin. The flight attendant gestured toward my row. I stood without hurry. Movements clean. Familiar. The aisle felt narrower as I walked forward, not from nerves, but from a tension gathering behind me. My parents finally noticed. Confusion crossed their faces first, then irritation. They whispered to each other, trying to place me in a story where I did not belong. I felt that old pressure for a second and let it pass. At the front, credentials were checked quickly. Efficiently. No drama. The kind of exchange that happens when expectations are already aligned. I turned slightly, just enough for first class to see the insignia, the badge, the authority that comes from preparation no one applauds. A murmur spread. Not loud. Curious. My parents went still. The captain addressed the cabin again, acknowledging the additional support and thanking passengers for their patience. The words were ordinary. The effect was not. My parents stared now, eyes moving from my face to the cockpit door and back again, trying to reconcile years of dismissal with the reality standing in front of them. My sister emerged briefly, caught sight of me, and stopped. Not shocked. Calculating. She had always understood effort, even when others reduced it to cost. She gave a small nod. Respect without spectacle. I stepped into the cockpit and the door closed behind me. The hum deepened. Checklists resumed. Outside, engines came alive with intention. Inside the cabin, questions swelled without answers. Pride had nowhere to sit anymore. The story my parents told strangers had fractured, and there was no polite way to mend it mid-flight. As the aircraft rolled forward again, I felt the weight lift. Not because they finally saw me, because for the first time, their belief was irrelevant. And when we lifted off, the truth would be undeniable, carried smoothly above the noise they once used to keep me grounded. The aircraft lifted smoothly, the city shrinking beneath us as if distance itself were a reset button. Inside the cockpit, everything was calm, procedural, exactly as it should be. Years of discipline live in moments like this. No emotions. No history. Just responsibility. Yet I knew what was happening behind that sealed door. My parents were no longer celebrating. They sat stiff in their seats, pride replaced by something colder. Confusion mixed with embarrassment. The kind that burns quietly because it has witnesses. People around them had noticed the shift. Whispers traveled faster than turbulence. A flight attendant passed through first class, offering drinks. My parents declined. Their attention was fixed forward, as if staring hard enough could undo what they had just seen. They had spent years telling a story where only one child mattered. Now that story had altitude. Inside the cockpit, my sister worked with focus. Professional. Controlled. She did not look at me again, but the energy between us had changed. Not rivalry. Recognition. She had always been allowed to chase dreams. I had built mine where no one bothered to look. Mid-flight, a minor systems check required coordination. Routine. Clean. Executed without hesitation. The captain acknowledged it with a nod. Trust is earned quietly in aviation. Not announced. Not gifted. Another announcement followed. Standard update. But my name moved through the cabin this time. Not loudly. Not explained. Just stated as part of the crew. The effect was immediate. I imagined my parents hearing it. Hearing my name spoken with authority. With purpose. With placement. Years of dismissal collapsing into a single, irreversible moment. They could not clap now. They could not boast. There was no version of this where they looked proud without also looking foolish. When turbulence hit briefly, passengers gripped armrests. Calm voices guided them through it. Confidence steadies fear better than reassurance ever could. I stayed exactly where I was needed. By the time the cabin settled again, something had shifted permanently. Not just for them. For me. I was no longer the expense they regretted. I was the reason this flight stayed steady. And they were trapped in their seats, forced to sit with the truth at 30,000 feet, unable to look away, unable to rewrite the past, knowing the landing would be even harder than the takeoff. Cruising altitude brought a strange quiet, the kind that lets thoughts grow louder. From the cockpit, everything looked controlled. Outside, clouds stretched endlessly, indifferent to family drama. Inside the cabin, I knew tension was tightening like a seatbelt pulled too far. A request came through for an operational review related to the route ahead. Weather changes. Minor, but enough to demand attention. I leaned in, focused, calm, exactly where I belonged. Decisions were made quickly, cleanly. Adjustments logged. This was the part of the job no one ever posts online. Another announcement followed. Professional. Reassuring. The kind that makes passengers feel safe without knowing why. I imagined my parents listening again, recognizing the voice patterns, the authority behind them, realizing this was not a coincidence or a favor. First class had gone quiet. A flight attendant later reported unusual behavior from 2 passengers near the front. Distress. Questions. Requests to speak with the captain. I knew without asking who they were. Protocol is clear in moments like that. Requests are acknowledged, not indulged. The cockpit is not a stage for emotional reckoning. The door stays closed. Still, I felt it. The weight of their presence pressing forward, trying to reach a version of me they could still control. But that version had never learned how to land a plane safely. This one had. As we began descent planning, the weather shifted again. Nothing dangerous. Enough to test preparation. I coordinated calmly, double-checking data, anticipating outcomes. The aircraft responded smoothly. Passengers felt only a gentle change, unaware of the precision behind it. In the cabin, that same flight attendant passed my parents once more. This time, they asked questions they had never asked before. About training. About responsibility. About how someone becomes trusted with hundreds of lives. No one answered them. Because some realizations arrived too late to be explained gently. As the runway came into view on the screens, I felt a final tightening in my chest. Not fear. Anticipation. The hardest part was not flying the plane. It was knowing that when the wheels touched down, there would be no altitude left to hide behind. And whatever waited beyond that gate would finally demand honesty from everyone on board. The descent began smoothly, the city rising to meet us through breaks in the clouds. From up here, everything looked orderly. Grids, lights, runways waiting their turn. Order is comforting when truth has already done its damage. Inside the cockpit, focus narrowed. Checklists flowed. Numbers confirmed. Hands steady. This was the moment that separates confidence from confidence. I had lived for moments like this, built myself around them while my family built a story without me. The cabin grew quiet again, that familiar hush before landing. Passengers leaned back, trusting strangers they would never meet. Trust is invisible when it works. I felt the weight of it settle comfortably on my shoulders. A final update went out to the cabin. Clear, calm, professional. I did not imagine my parents' faces this time. I did not need to. Their reckoning was already in motion. The wheels touched down cleanly. A soft jolt. Applause rippled through the cabin, instinctive and relieved. The sound carried differently now. Not celebration. A closing chapter. As we taxied to the gate, procedures continued. Routine. Precise. No room for emotion yet. Outside, ground crew moved into place, unaware that something far heavier than luggage was about to be unloaded. The cockpit door opened. I stepped into the aisle again, posture unchanged, expression neutral. Passengers glanced up, some nodding, some curious, some grateful. First class went still. My parents sat rigid, eyes fixed on me now, no pride left to perform, only questions they had buried for years. I passed them without stopping. That cut deeper than any argument ever could. At the door, I paused just long enough for the moment to settle. For them to understand this was not a misunderstanding. Not a fluke. Not a favor. This was my life. Earned. Sustained. Unapologetic. As passengers began to deplane, I felt it building behind me. The need for answers. For explanations. For reconciliation that would never arrive on their timeline. Because the real confrontation would not happen in the air. It would happen on the ground, where excuses lose altitude fast. And I was finally ready to land that too. The terminal was loud with movement, rolling bags, overlapping announcements, life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. For me, everything had already changed. I stood near the gate, watching passengers disperse, each one carrying a piece of a moment my parents would never forget. They approached slowly, no confidence left in their steps. My father looked smaller than I remembered. My mother's face had lost its practiced certainty. Years ago, they had decided who mattered. Now they were standing in front of the consequence. They tried to speak. Apologies came out tangled and incomplete, weighed down by explanations that arrived far too late. They said they never meant to hurt me. They said they were trying to be practical. They said they thought I would understand. I listened without interrupting. Understanding does not require agreement. I told them calmly that I had built my life without their approval because waiting for it nearly erased me. I explained that being called a waste does not disappear just because success shows up later. Words land. They stay. My sister joined us, quiet and composed. She acknowledged the truth without drama. She said she always wondered why I never shared my plans. I told her that survival teaches silence. She nodded, accepting that. There was no shouting, no tears, no cinematic forgiveness, just clarity. I wished them well and turned away. That was the hardest part and the cleanest. Closure does not always come with hugs. Sometimes it comes with distance that finally feels healthy. As I walked through the terminal, my phone buzzed with work updates, schedules, responsibilities waiting. My future was no longer hypothetical. It was booked, logged, and trusted. Behind me, my parents stood still, watching the child they dismissed walk away with purpose. Ahead of me, the path was clear. They once told me I was a waste of money and time. Now they knew the truth. They had invested in the wrong assumption. And I had already taken off without them. Tell me in the comments section that which part hit you the most. If you like this story, hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories of betrayal, payback, and satisfying revenge. See you in the next one.